I've had kids as young as 13 or 14 starting to hear voices, suspect that the world around them is conspiring against them to kill them, run away from their school, run away from their homes, stop eating, stop sleeping because they're experiencing a psychotic breakdown because of cannabis itself.
Many teens do not realize the long-term consequences of using drugs such as this, both legally and personally. We're more likely to be like, okay, क्या ही होएगा?
बहुत कुछ हो जाएगा.
जिंदगी बदल जाएगी.
जिंदगी ऐसे बदलेगी कि आपके हाथ से निकल जाएगी.
But I mean, one time, two time, you think nothing will happen.
No one starts thinking that I'm going to get addicted to this substance. Everyone starts it for just one time or two times.
The forbidden fruit is always tastier.
In the Aryan Khan case, they called him a peddler on circumstantial evidence and denied him bail. I think that was very unjust.
You pay them lakhs of rupees and get out of there. Or you pay lakhs of rupees to lawyers and be inside for at least 6 months.
Almost everyone in the media industry is using drugs. What is it about these drugs that compel these influential people?
Even though they feel like it's increasing their concentration or attention, or it's perhaps helping their stress, it's in fact not.
If you find yourself in a company where people are using, stay the hell away.
Welcome to Reshaping Society, a podcast where we delve into topics that matter, especially those that many of us tend to avoid. I'm Eva Bothra, and today we're confronting a topic that is as urgent and necessary as it is uncomfortable. Drug abuse and its legal and ethical implications. 1 in 17 people use drugs, and this epidemic is just getting worse, with the average drug user being just 15 years of age. The gravity of the situation is so profound that almost everyone watching likely knows someone close to them who has experienced or experimented with this. Today, to uncover this devastating issue of drug abuse, two incredible professionals join us. On one side, we have Mr. Gautam Mohan, a criminal lawyer who specializes in narcotics law and has first-hand experience navigating the complex legal landscape surrounding drug abuse and trafficking in India. And on the other, we have Dr. Prerna Maheshwari, a psychiatrist who has been at the forefront of understanding how substance abuse intertwines with mental health, especially among teenagers. Thank you both for joining me here today to discuss this pressing issue. I'm sure with the surge in drug-related cases, your schedules must be jam-packed. So I really appreciate you guys making the time to be here today.
Thank you for having
Pleasure
us.
is mine.
As a high school student, I'm at the forefront of exposure to drugs. There has been no generation that has had such free access to it. And the fact that it's illegal just adds to the thrill of experiencing it. And almost everyone I know has tried some form of it. 9th graders carrying vapes in their pockets, to some students having vodka in their bottles, to harder substances. The taboo of drug abuse no longer exists, and it's more widespread than ever before. We don't often talk about the mental and emotional toll these choices can take. The pressure of school, social media, and just growing up in a high-paced world can feel overwhelming. But when we turn to drugs for relief, the costs aren't just physical. They're psychological, emotional, and to society too. And that is why I felt this podcast was necessary. Conducting my own research, I've come across drugs like ayahuasca and other psychedelic drugs. Honestly, the way people describe it sounds fascinating, and I can see why many other teenagers like me might be tempted to try it. It's that allure about drugs that they're cool and an escape from reality that attracts many of us. From what I've observed, that there's this belief that using drugs is dangerous or a sort of rebellion. But is it really about rebellion, or is it about trying to escape something deeper?
No one starts a drug by thinking that, okay, I want to rebel or I want to get addicted to it. That's not exactly the goal of someone who's starting on something. They're either someone who wants to experience it, perhaps due to the marketing that you mentioned. That,
Peer pressure.
Or peer pressure, exactly, right? Or just the feeling of wanting something new, that seeking a new experience that a lot of people want to do, right? It could also be an impulse. It could also be to have a nice time with friends. It could also be a way to escape the realities that we often ignore. Now, when we talk about escaping realities, one of the things that actually do lead to drug abuse is having a mental illness itself. So people who have difficulties with attention, people who have difficulties with stress, with anxiety, who have mood symptoms, who have a high degree of impulsivity, who can experience a lot of trauma, or who experience abusive environment around themselves, can also, want to experience some relief from it. And a temporary relief is something that a drug promises to give you. Even the
Especially
way
in a highly competitive environment.
Exactly.
It's freedom.
Right? So there's something that you mentioned in your introduction regarding how the taboo no longer exists. The taboo didn't stop people from taking it before anyway. It was just lesser known to others about who's taking what, and now it's just more known that someone is using a form of drug, perhaps. Right?
So actually, when drugs became illegalized, our parents were growing up. So they saw drugs as the most harmful thing that could exist, and they completely shunned all their kids from it. Drug discussion couldn't be brought up at home. So I think that's what I mean when we're talking about taboo.
Right. Okay. So it is a reality that drugs are harmful. But the thing is, even now, people who start using drugs do not exactly bring it on their dinner table. Right? They are still going to hide it from people who are their caregivers, who are at a position of authority, which is why you have students who carry vodka in bottles, right, in the first place. Yeah. Another thing that we fail to ignore is with the already existing prevalent use of drugs in society, you have children growing up and modeling those behaviors. You have it being shown in media or in social media as an escape or as a way to, experience novelty or as a way to experience a high. Or maybe it's something cool that is depicted, right? Another reason is that it also tends to make you believe that there is something more to than just the mundane and boring experience or the routine experience that life can often be, or how hard life can often be. So it's more than rebellion, it's more than escape. It helps a lot of people cope with the realities that they're living in. It just becomes a very unhealthy way of coping in itself.
Could you give a real-world example you've encountered?
Yeah, for example, a lot of children these days have access to cannabis.
That's marijuana.
That's marijuana, exactly. Whether they are smoking up or using it in ingestible forms like brownies, a lot of children these days have access to it. And a lot of them that I have seen using it from such a young age, either use it for peer pressure or to experience it, but also continue using it because they feel like it makes them have a better attention span, or it makes them have less racing thoughts, or it makes their mind slow down, especially if there are people who are suffering from anxiety or inattention. Okay. Also, for people who have a lot of difficulty in managing their emotions, like if they feel sadness too intensely or anger too intensely, it makes them feel like their mind is quieter and their feelings are a little number. Okay. So that's how people get into it. Now, a lot of them do not know that it can actually lead to psychotic experiences. So I've had kids as young as 13 or 14 starting to hear voices, suspect that the world around them is conspiring against them to kill them, right? Run away from their school, run away from their homes, stop eating, stop sleeping, stop bathing, stop taking care of themselves for days and days together, just be in a room, holed up, fearing the world outside because they're experiencing a psychotic breakdown because of cannabis itself.
So it starts off as a wanting to try something new, but it leads to some psychotic thing that they might not have wished for.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
I would like to add something. In common students' parlance, not students, young people, they call it flipping. So-and-so person got flipped. Okay, we had this really cool trip, but one of them flipped.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What happens is sometimes when you have some disorders, for example, ADHD, this normalizes the brain when you have stimulants, isn't it, doctor? So,
Absolutely.
for example, in certain conditions, you're not supposed to have those drugs. A normal mind may experience high, but if you have some underlying disorders or genetic, for example, in some families, you are prone to schizophrenia, for example. Such people, if you take too much of stimulants, they flip it. They get psychotic experiences.
I had a kid who was as young as 19 who started taking tablets of which have opioid, and he would crush them and distill and add them in distilled water and then inject it into his bloodstream. Now, he would get the high of opioid, which is what, he was going for. And also, after a point of time, it's addiction as a disorder, right? So now they're experiencing more and more craving to continue doing it, even if it's harmful for them, okay? And what happened to him a year later on was that the particulate matter that he injected inside in his bloodstream started depositing in his lungs. And now, age as young as 19, he's had to remove half of one lung of his. So young, and it's so tragic that he's going to have breathing difficulties for the rest of his life for someone who didn't even know the effects that could happen to them. Like, these are not well-informed choices.
That's the main aim of this podcast, is to make people well aware of the consequences.
Yes.
Actually, one more thing I wanted to bring up was the difference of drug use and drug abuse. Like, when does the lines between them blur?
Drug use, of course, this is the doctor's subject, but still I'll answer. Okay. Drug use is when you are prescribed a drug by a medical professional to correct some deficiency in your brain, to correct a certain, for example, in ADHD, your dopamine sensitivity will be low. Right. To correct that, it is given. So when a stimulant, for example, methylphenidate is given for ADHD, that when an ADHD person has it, his brain or her brain becomes normal and they become calm. But when normal neurotypical brain has it, they get high, wonderful high, that is supposed to be, So that's when the abuse part begins.
Okay, so basically the difference is when you're using it for medical use, then it's called drug abuse.
Yes.
But when you're using it as a normal person for a high, that's abuse.
Yes.
To simplify it even further, if it causes distressing effects that are disturbing your daily life and it's harmful to you, it is not prescribed to you to take it in the first place, that is abuse, right? A use would be that it's prescribed to you in safe doses. For example, stimulants are a regular treatment for conditions like ADHD. So stimulants that we use are forms of amphetamines. But in the same manner, if someone uses amphetamines on a daily basis, they are more likely to experience, psychotic symptoms or manic episodes, or these really high highs and they crash and they experience these really low lows, okay? So as opposed to, like Sir mentioned, someone with a neurodivergent brain who is who has been diagnosed and then it's given to them as a form of treatment in very low safe doses in a controlled manner, that would be use. This would be abuse. So another thing, if I may add, is that the very effects that people are, taking drugs to escape from, right? That actually is part of the withdrawal symptom of any drug. So people who use more tobacco when they're stressed. In fact, anxiety and irritability or reduction in concentration is one of the withdrawal symptoms of tobacco itself. Same for alcohol, right? The withdrawal symptoms of alcohol itself is low mood, and it changes your personality so much. It makes you very irritable, it makes you very angry while you're using it and when you're withdrawing from it too. Similarly for any substance, even cannabis for that matter, it's use of cannabis, a lot of people call it a bad trip, but actually it's anxiety and paranoia that you're experiencing. And following that, even in the withdrawal period of cannabis, someone can experience even more anxiety and paranoia. And in that withdrawal period, your body feels like, I need to have more of this substance to now reduce the uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. So that's how the pattern of abuse, per se, gets established, which goes on for years, and then further it can become an addiction, or what we call in scientific terms a dependence to a substance.
And people who use tobacco, they experience a little increased cognitive abilities. But what happens is, imagine your cognitive abilities are here, and while taking tobacco it goes a little bit like this. Later it drips to such an extent it will take your thinking skills higher. But what happens, not from here like before, from here comes normal. And then that's what happens.
So it lowers it almost down.
And then lifts it when you use it.
Because if you compare the brains of, what it is for someone who's not using a substance as opposed to for someone who's using a substance, their brain physiology and structure has changed. If you compare like their MRI and functional MRI reports. So what he mentioned, that can actually be seen as a change in the structure of the brain, where the areas of the brain which are responsible for cognitive processing, for making decisions, for rational thinking, has actually reduced in volume. So even though they feel like it's increasing their concentration or attention, or it's perhaps helping their stress, it's in fact not. It has already brought it down to a level lower than what they were before, and then giving them this false sense of belief that it is increasing it.
Many teens do not realize the long-term consequences of using drugs such as this, both legally and personally. What would you say to a teenager who might be underestimating these risks? Because these teenagers are just getting into this phase. So we're more likely to be like, okay, क्या ही होएगा?
बहुत कुछ हो जाएगा.
जिंदगी बदल जाएगी और आप नहीं रहोगे.
आप नहीं रहोगे और जिंदगी ऐसे बदलेगी कि आपके हाथ से निकल जाएगी.
But I mean, one time, two time, you think nothing will happen, right?
So see, everyone starts like that. Like I said, no one starts thinking that I'm going to get addicted to this substance. Everyone starts it for just one time or two times. It's the nature of the substance and what it does to the level of dopamine, a neurotransmitter in your brain, that makes you feel the craving for it again. It's the effect of the substance to produce dependence to it. You understand? I'll tell you a funny story. There was this one patient of mine who was coming for a de-addiction treatment. And while I was giving them prescription drugs like anti-craving agents, they asked me if the anti-craving agent itself has any side effects. While they have already taken alcohol in such a high, dose or for such a long period that they're already experiencing everything bad about it in their bodies.
And now they're worried about the side
effect of something that's actually a prescription drug, which rightfully so. I mean, nothing wrong in asking your doctor for it. But my point is, the brain is altered in such a manner that, you don't see what's right in front of you. And after a point of time, it's not your fault. Before you know it, you already become a person who has gotten addicted or gotten dependent on a substance that has changed your brain. That's made the substance the center of your world, and before you know it, you just don't have the cognitive abilities to know better or to decide better for yourself.
Yes, I need to add something. Yeah, I'll tell you something about this person whom I knew very well when we were young, sort of like a best friend. Okay, so this person initially he started the gateway drug, what we call marijuana. And initially, they used to be very cool about it. They used to speak as if, oh, I got the Mysore mango, I got that stuff, this stuff, wonderful. This person had a promising life ahead of him. He was doing a good course, he was from a good family. The family could have afforded to send him anywhere for education and, fulfill any of his dreams. Later, what happened, he got into this, and his only priority became meeting with friends and smoking up. And after a few years, when I meet him, he's delivering pizzas, actually. Yeah, that is his work. He will not get work anywhere. He didn't complete any of his courses. And whatever he gets, he wants to, family wouldn't give him money. Even if they have money, they know
that he's going to spend it.
Yeah, he's going to spend it on this. And he's in rehab 2-3 times. Forcefully they take them, and months together in rehab, and the only priority of his life is how to get the next high. That is the only priority.
So their main entire life motive becomes, where am I going to get the next high? So they forget everything else and they're just on themselves, no family obligations, within themselves, choosing the next high. I think it's the most selfish thing one could do then.
Yes.
If you look at it in a biological perspective, it's actually quite tragic because it's a symptom, it's something called salience, where you are neglecting all your other formerly pleasurable or motivating activities or activities that, meant a lot to you earlier. And you are just completely indulging in drug-seeking behavior because, see, I'll tell you what happens. you start taking a substance that could be potentially addictive in nature. It releases dopamine in your brain. After a point of time, when you increase your use further, or you associate your use to a particular cue, that, okay, when I'm stressed, I want it, when I'm sad, I want it, or when I'm with friends, I want it, right? So you're attaching these purposes to it, like these cues to it, that, okay, this is what I need when I feel this, right? Or when you continue to increase your use, after a point of time, your brain gets used to that certain level of dopamine increase that it needs.
And it just keeps craving more and more.
Absolutely. So now your receptors have gotten used to that. It's actually a symptom that they are experiencing. Okay, there's something called salience, in which you neglect all your previously motivating and pleasurable activities, and you then move towards just drug seeking. And why it happens is, any substance which is capable of producing dependence, alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, any of those for that, opioids, anything for that matter, which is capable of producing dependence, releases dopamine in your brain. Okay? And when you use it, you experience a certain dopamine release and high. Now, if you continue to increase your use, or if you continue to associate your use to cues in the environment, that when I'm sad, I need it, when I'm happy, I need it, when I'm with friends, I need it, when I'm bored, I need it.
Assigning a purpose to it.
Exactly, right?
Excuse.
So when you... Sorry?
Excuse.
Exactly. So when you start to attribute reasons to it, and when you start to increase your use, your brain gets used to a certain level of a dopamine high. Now, if there's a day where you don't use it, your brain's receptors are going to cry for it. Ki, Are, you've been taking it every day, now where is it gone? Right?
It's tragic.
Absolutely. And then your entire brain structure has changed from a recreational impulsive use to a compulsive pattern, where you feel like, and your brain makes you feel like you absolutely need it to survive. So it's a very tragic outcome of something that was supposedly enjoyable in nature, and before you know it, it could turn into something so, horrific. With respect to what you told me, that what is one advice that I would give teenagers, I think one thing that I think I would like to tell teenagers is that with the amount of information that's there at their disposal, and with the amount of conversations that are happening freely in many households at least, or even in schools or amongst peers, try to ask questions as to, if you want to experience something, why do you want to experience it? What is it that you actually want to experience, right? Because if you start to associate using a substance to cues, like I mentioned, or giving a reason for wanting to experience it, you're more likely to fall into the pattern of dependence and addiction, because you're going to start to feel like you need to have it just to feel okay and normal.
But when you're like in a very high stress environment, you don't really want to ask those questions. You just want like freedom.
At least, see, the world might not let you slow down, but you need to have your own space and corner in your mind where you can do that. And it's very important for youngsters to reach out to doctors or advisors who can at least give them the right information. It does not always do good to believe everything that is portrayed to you by either friends or by older adults or by media, right? It's much better that if you actually have access to information, then use it the healthy and right way. Get to know everything that can happen, and then make healthier choices. And if there is a purpose that you do realize that, okay, I feel mostly sad all the time, or I'm so anxious all the time because of the high-paced environment or the stress around me, then actually seek treatment for that. Get help for that.
Therapy.
Absolutely.
We are built to seek happiness. We get happiness, we are wired to get happiness through little things like friendships, love interest, relations, reading books. Happiness hormone, dopamine, the neurotransmitter gets released in the brain. So suddenly what happens when dopamine gets flooded? So that's when then you fail to get happiness from simple things of life. Then all your relations, everything gets disturbed. meaningless. You won't get the same happiness by taking your family for dinner or holding your baby. You will not get the same happiness what you're supposed to get.
So the real takeaway here is that before taking a drug, we need to be more active and consciously think about not taking shortcuts and actually realize that it's just dopamine that's being produced in our brains, and instead find pleasures in the small things in life.
You must have heard of the mouse experiment, right? Where they connected electrodes and something to a mouse. So where if it pushed the button, the mouse would get a hit of dopamine. Guess what it did? The mouse went on pressing the lever to get dopamine released to such an extent that it refused to drink water, eat food.
Or even escape. I think I've heard that story.
Until it died, it kept pushing. That is what happens to all of us when we enter into the world of instant dopamine.
It's like going around in that cycle and not being able to escape it once you're in it.
Yes.
It's actually pretty similar to what happens to us when we are also on social media. All the reels are 1 minute, your emotions change every minute, and even social media itself, if you're talking about addiction per se, even more than drugs, social media is also a huge form of addiction these days. And having one form of addiction can make you have a higher risk of having another form of addiction in the form of drugs, right? So we all have to be really careful with instant gratification, with just wanting that one moment of pleasure right now.
It's not worth it. It's not worth throwing their entire life away or think. Like, even if you think like one time it's going to be freedom, it's going to lead to more. And I think people should realize that part.
And that's the effect of the drug itself. You cannot control it. It's an illusion that you can control having just one glass of a drink or just one cigarette and then stop.
The dopamine is not going to let you stop.
Absolutely. The drug is going to make you want more of it.
So first it starts off with a will, and then after that you're just conditioned to want more and more. So I think we should also focus on the legal aspects of it, the legal procedures, both for minors, the difference, and for adults.
Okay, all minors in India are governed under the Juvenile Justice Act. So no matter what crime you are, booked for, you would be tried by a specialized judge, court for that, and you would be sent to a correction home, not to prison. So it is under the presumption that a minor cannot be guilty of a crime. So
But is it the juvenile court or a rehab?
Yes, juvenile court it is.
So they don't go to the rehab center?
They can go at their discretion if they want help or if the family wants help. But from a legal point of view, there is no automatic system where they are sent to rehab.
And the family has the final say.
Yes, the family has the final say. So it is important for every family to know what is happening in the house with their minors, because they are more prone to get swayed by others, peers, to look cool.
The funny thing is, like, half the parents don't even realize how good their kids are at hiding it nowadays. They're so creative.
It's not nowadays. I don't think any generation.
It has always been like that.
Yeah, I mean.
But I think parents do need to be more aware of, because it's a new age and it's become more accessible to these kids.
It's a lot to learn for parents and also to be aware of. Like, things are changing by the minute.
It's also a lot to take in, like, oh my God, my child is doing drugs, like my entire name will be ruined. That sort of mentality still exists, especially in the Indian society, I'm sure.
You're right, and also as a parent, you feel so much responsibility and shame because you feel responsible for having not brought the child up in a certain way, but a child always has more influences than just parenting. School is an influence. The way people behave with them, peers, teachers at school are also an influence. What goes on in the outside world, how accessible drugs are, the way it is portrayed in media, everything is an influence. I mean,
yes, as parenting is not limited to the parent. It is the whole society which raises a child.
I think before we move on to the legal, I want to bring up another point when it comes to parents. It's like when a parent finds out about a child having drug, the main instinct would be to like hit the child or to like ground them, not let them meet their friends anymore. But I feel that'll just further isolate the child and push them down a circle even worse, and they'll find more creative ways to get the drug, or probably resort to worse methods of living, or maybe even suicide. So what advice would you give to these parents? Like, what are they meant to do in a situation like this to help the child rather than, make the situation worse?
I think this is where taboo and stigma comes in. There is, like you said, there is a reduction in the taboo of talking around substance use, but there is still a lot of stigma when it comes to treatment. A lot of people, when they get to know that their child is, indulging in drug abuse, they tend to either take it on themselves and then they're trying to fix it by taking it out on the child, or they try to do what they know best, which are some of the methods that you mentioned. But I think it needs to go a step further than that. You need to sit down with your child and ask them why they felt the need to do it in the first place. And if you feel like that is not something that you are trained to do or you will be able to do healthily for the child, then it's best to remember the end goal in mind, that you want your child to be happy, healthy and a successful adult. So please seek help from the people who are trained to do it in such a way. This medications, therapy, treatment, de-addiction, rehab. There is such a huge stigma and misinformation around de-addiction itself. People believe that, you cannot get treated, or that you are always going to be in rehab, or your life is going to be ruined. A lot more success stories, I feel, need to also come out.
They need to be outshined.
Absolutely. And also something that happens to what happens to someone who is reminded constantly of their mistake. Like, for example, if someone has been caught taking drugs and they're completely isolated from friends, they're going to experience even more distress, which is going to make them crave drugs even more. Exactly. So it doesn't work that way, right? And then if they're constantly scolded or reminded of their mistake, then they feel even more isolated from the person who they could turn to for help. So instead of correction or reform, it becomes punishment oriented, and that does not help children.
That's again, the entire Indian legal landscape is also built on punishment, then rehab. Is it?
That he'll answer.
Yes, more or less, we have to admit it, yes. So in Indian laws, yes, there is a system. A person who is addicted can always approach the authorities and say, I need help. We have that. Yes. But the problem is, once the authorities come to know, there is always a consumption case against them. All cases, all matters related to drugs, whether it is natural drugs, synthetic, everything is governed under the NDPS Act, Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. So in that is mainly to prevent the sale, storage, consumption, everything of all these drugs. So it is mainly to prevent peddling. So peddling? Peddling is the commercial sale of a drug. You are a carrier, you get from a source, you peddle it, circulate it, for monetary gains.
Like a distributor of sorts.
Yes, that's what. The NDPS Act, as I said, it is a very stringent act. And I would say if you're booked under the NDPS Act, it is worse than getting booked for murder or rape or dacoity. Okay. For example, in criminal justice system of India, we say bail is the rule and jail is the exception. Okay, that means if a person who is under investigation, booked for a crime, if he's willing to cooperate with the police and the investigating officer, there is no need to arrest him, even if it's a murder case. We have a recent 2022 judgment. So when a police officer gives you a notice, you go appear, everything, and cooperate with the investigation, and you will get a bail. Unless the investigating officer is convinced that you will escape, or you want to evade law, or you will intimidate the witness, or you will destroy evidence. Unless you do that, bail is the rule, jail is the exception. In drugs case, It is the reverse. Jail is the rule and bail is the exception.
This recently happened with the Aryan Khan case, where
Yes.
he was denied bail and he was meant to stay in jail for 26 days on circumstantial evidence.
Evidence, yes. Yes. So this particular act is very stringent. Not only it is stringent, it is very detailed. It tells how exactly you are supposed to be, what exactly will happen to you, how exactly the search should take place. Magistrate, you can request under, Section 50. You could request that the search be done in front of a magistrate, and they'll be complied. And if it is not complied, all the stringent requirements, if it is not complied, you will get bail a little more easier. Small quantity, intermediate quantity, and commercial quantity. Let's take marijuana as example. Small quantities below 1 kilogram is small quantity. If you're caught with it, it's easier to get bail. Okay. Intermediate quantity is below 1 kg to 20 kg. That is intermediate.
So you're like a low trader.
Yes, you're a small time guy. Peddler maybe. Yeah. So there also it is a little more easy, comparatively easy compared to commercial quantity. But if you are caught with commercial quantity above 20 kilograms, you will not see sunlight for a long time. You will not.
So much for innocent until proven guilty.
Yes, so this particular law is like that. This was enacted in 1985 during Rajiv Gandhi's time due to US pressure. And until then, for example, cannabis used to be freely available, used by sadhus. Even now there are cultural exemptions.
There are cultural significances too.
Yeah, bhang is available.
Yes,
It's made from the resin. If you are caught with commercial quantity, for example, MDMA 10 grams is commercial quantity, just 10 grams. You're caught with it, you will not get bail unless a very serious lapse has taken place from the investigation or prosecution side. And what is the punishment for commercial quantity? 10 to 20 years imprisonment and fine. Okay. It is a very serious offense, so do not enter narcotics business.
So actually I wanted to know how the Indian law differentiates between a user and peddler, because in the Aryan Khan case, on the person, it was not caught a lot amount of drugs. So like what is the Indian law doing to differentiate between the two? Because they called him a peddler on circumstantial evidence and denied him bail. I think that was very unjust.
Okay, I'll tell you what. See, user and a peddler, there is legal distinction. According to NDPS Act, if you are caught using, also you'll be booked under the Act for consumption. For consumption, there is no requirement that some recovery has to be made separately from you. In your bloodstream, if it is there, after testing, you'll be booked for consumption. Technically, all offences in the NDPS Act are supposed to be non-bailable offences. However, for consumption cases, the convention is that you get police station bail. It's treated more like a bailable offence. So you could get bail right from the station. The problem happens is when you are caught with something in your person. Okay, so there are so many technicalities from where it is caught, whether it is on your person, in your vehicle, in your luggage, in your purse, where you carrying that purse. So many things are there. So many technicalities. If we explain now, people will get encouraged. So yeah,
More creative ideas they'll find on hiding.
Yeah. So yeah. So if something has been recovered from you, then the earlier distinctions kick in, whether it is a small quantity, intermediate or commercial quantity. Then they're booked accordingly under non-bailable sections. And for commercial, it is the most difficult. And getting caught with illegal substances in India, more than the legal part, you need to be afraid of the illegal part.
Because the mafia will be behind you.
No. I will tell you. If you are caught with something, for example, in Bangalore, okay, you are more likely to find yourself in a dark room somewhere in a police station, or where you will be, people will be negotiating with you how much you can offer to get outside without. There are cops who are unscrupulous. All police brothers are very nice people, but there are some unscrupulous elements in the police department. They only care about their enriching themselves at the cost of these people. accused persons. So they would raid you. Imagine you're partying, you're sitting in a party. It's a nice, chill vibes, okay? 7 to 8 people are there. Someone opens something, 2-3 people consume it. Someone tips off, cops come. These are actual situations what we see, okay? So mostly the girls are spared sometimes. They put the guy in the jeep and they go. People who can afford to pay, they always escape at the illegal level. At the legal level, we are all equal. But at the illegal level, do not do drugs if your parents do not have enough money. Do not do. You will find.
Do it anyway.
I know. Do not do it. Do not do it anyway, and especially so if you lack financial resources. You're more likely to, not see sunlight for a long time, because I've seen cases where cops have raided, taken the boys, and the boys whose parents could afford, they pay lakhs of rupees per head to the unscrupulous elements in the police. And people who cannot afford, their quantity is also foisted upon the people. For example, one person has 2 grams of MD. His friends had 2 grams. They paid and escaped. Everything comes upon this particular person. Then it becomes 10 grams in total. It becomes commercial quantity. Yeah, you could have got bail easier. Then whatever you explain, okay, my father is poor. In one of my cases, the boy's father was working in a puncture shop in Kerala. So what to do? So until and they couldn't even afford our services, but we did what we could, for the family. We guided them. We told them where to get legal help. So the thing is, peer pressure is a thing. It's a horrible thing. And if you find yourself in a company where people are using, stay the hell away. Get out of there. Anytime cops can come, and you will find yourself in an interrogation room. In some stations, there are actually interrogation rooms, People will be sitting, you will be sitting, someone will come. Probably the cops, if they cannot negotiate directly with you, they will negotiate through a lawyer. And you will have to pay through the roof to get out of there. And people will be ready to pay. You know why? The reason is, you pay them lakhs of rupees and get out of there, or you pay lakhs of rupees to lawyers and be inside for at least 6 months. So you would prefer paying to the cops.
Even the amount it takes to spend to keep consuming it and to keep supporting the addiction that is a disease in your brain itself is a lot. People fall into debt. People, commit crimes for it. People completely neglect their family. People really find any way, by hook or by crook, to, have more money and spend it on the drug that is making them get into a bad place in the first. Firstly, crimes can be committed under the influence of it itself. So under the influence of drugs, you're more impulsive, you are, you are less inhibited, and you also cannot think rationally, right? So that makes you at a higher risk of committing crimes. It could be rash driving. We have seen a lot of drunk driving cases these days. It could be theft. It could be even stealing off from your relatives. Violence, exactly. Domestic violence, for that matter. Yes. We have a long-standing history in our country and everywhere in the world where intimate partner violence itself is related to a lot of alcohol abuse.
My father used to say, Nariman Point in 80s Bombay, foreign women, to get a hit, they were sexually exploited.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't mind because they just want to get high. So,
I just watched the movie Udta Punjab yesterday. Alia Bhatt's character, they'd put her under drugs and then sexually exploit her. So, these are common practices.
Yes, these are, because, the person does not have, they're not in control of what's happening to them. They cannot react when they are under the influence either. So it makes people more vulnerable to such exploitation. Also, with respect to how drugs change your mind, the way it makes you more impulsive and less inhibited itself makes you make poor decisions. So automatically you gear towards a life of making reckless and rash decisions just to support your addiction.
I think like the main point here is that when it comes to drugs, there's not a lot of information out there for people to access, because a lot of people are looking for information. They're just looking for the hit. So they don't really worry about the consequences or the criminal actions. But I want to go down the lines on the debate of decriminalization of drugs with countries like Portugal, where we've seen a rapid decline in drug-related cases, and they have decriminalized drugs. And there are also countries like Netherlands, San Francisco, or Canada, which have legalized drugs.
Yes.
And over there, it's more in a controlled manner. I'm sure you'll be able to tell me more about that. And I recently heard that most world leaders go under the influence of drugs for a certain period of time, or once a day, they take a small dosage just to widen their thoughts and perspectives. And Mark Zuckerberg, he comes to India every year, takes an LSD just to widen his thoughts and get a new perspective to life. Could you please explain what is it about these drugs that compel these influential people? Because almost everyone in the media industry is using drugs to get that creative perspective. Many artists. Could you please explain on that? And so, could you please explain, is decriminalizing better, and the entire debate around it for our viewers?
So, firstly, I think it is the promise of the experience a drug gives. So when you have stimulants or when you have psychoactive substances, they do give you certain experiences which can change how you perceive the world in form, in size, in shape, in color, the kind of thoughts you experience, the pace at which you experience these thoughts. A lot of people do speak about how it can be mind-altering, right? Now, the problem there is that while you may start it off in a creative pursuit, if the dose is not regulated, or if the usage is not regulated, if it's not done in a safe, controlled manner, you may actually fall into the pattern of addiction where it's no longer useful for anything creative at all. It is in fact destroying those very things and the abilities to seek those experiences that you wanted to get in the first place, right? Secondly, you never know how it affects you as a person. A lot of people having LSD have also experienced psychotic symptoms like hallucinations or experiencing delusions. You do not know which category you're going to fall under. So with respect to this topic particularly, there is a lot of medical research also ongoing that are there safe doses of substances that we can use for treatment, right? So psychoactive stimulants, marijuana for that matter, they're all being researched. To give you a better idea of it, even drugs like heroin or morphine or codeine were actually started off for medicinal purposes. Like even the oldest cough syrups.
Yes.
Exactly, right? They contain contents of opium or they contain contents of a little bit of alcohol because it was used for medicinal purposes, right? But over time, the dose in which people take it, the way in which people take it, the unregulated use of it has led to more and more addiction. So I think one thing that we need to learn from it is when we read these reports and hear of it, firstly, you do not know what experience you're going to have. Secondly, the dose at which you take it, where you take it, what substance you take, what is your body's physiology really matters. You do not know what kind of experience you're going to have, and you simply do not know the dose at which you're taking it. Like you said, there's a lack of information, right? So it really matters that while medical research is ongoing, safe doses are being determined, experiences that can or cannot happen at what dose is also being determined, side effects are being determined. We as consumers of anything in the world make well-informed choices.
About decriminalization, why do we get alcohol, sometimes from the government stores? Why is alcohol allowed? What will happen if alcohol is not allowed? people start brewing in their backyard, then they will risk themselves, their eyes, their kidneys, everything. If something is legal, it becomes easier for the government to regulate. So, for example, if you brew alcohol, you get, what do you get? First, you get methyl alcohol. You drink that, your eyes gone. So, and when something is illegal, what happens? A common man's control goes out of it and it becomes a mafia controlled thing. That is the reason there is crime and violence associated with drugs and cartels. Why? Because this is a highly profitable business and everyone wants to control the sale and supply. This leads to violence and all this, weapons, gun laws, everything, all these things. So that is one aspect of it. You must be knowing about the ban in US, what happened.
Prohibition Act of 1929, yeah.
That is when all these real mafias began to take grip in US. All right. So what happens in Bihar? Alcohol is not allowed there, but you get those who have to get will get, and all this illegal stuff also they get in Gujarat also, same thing. So the forbidden fruit is always tasty.
Sweeter. That's the same thing for all teenagers to either drive or drink alcohol or get drugs. It's a thrill that it's illegal. It just adds to it.
One more small example. In Bangladesh, what people smuggle? Cough syrup to get high. Alcohol is totally, not allowed there, because of which people resort to such acts. And against decriminalization, if you see, when something is abundant, just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. Just because some people are not made for it. Some people's brains are more prone to addiction. And these people, when they use it, and they risk themselves and, their lives. For example, if you see in Europe, in Europe, they stand for individual liberty. It is under the premise that a person should have the right to destroy himself also. He should have that liberty. That is there. But it is also affecting and, introducing the same drugs to many people who wouldn't have otherwise come to the, usage if the prohibition wasn't there. So both sides have plus and minus to it. So it is up to the individual, and as a society, we need to address it at that level. Parents, we should stop toxic parenting and encourage children to be more open and, So on a social level, it has to be addressed.
But in a country like India, there's so many people. If it's made legal like in countries like Canada and all, I don't think regulation would be that successful.
Okay, but regulation always helps to some extent. For example, you don't see where alcohol is allowed, you don't see people drink alcohol and lose their eyesight. Because even for a small amount, 200 or 300 rupees also, people can get a full bottle in, the cheapest brands and drink it safely. What happens after that is another question. But
there's less adulteration if it's regulated, is what you mean?
Yes. If it is regulated, people can get something safe to drink. Okay, for example, arak was banned in many states.
What is arak?
Arak is moonshine.
Okay.
Moonshine means sugars and other fruits made at home, it's distilled. So earlier used to get in packets, for example, in Karnataka. In Kerala, it was banned in 96, April 1. I remember the date. Yeah. A.K. Antony was the chief minister. Okay. So when arak was there were chances of adulterated araks. Anyone could brew that and, adulterate it. And people used to lose eyesight, kidneys, everything, and people used to die also. Hooch tragedies, we used to call them. So such things are less likely to happen when a licensed brewery produces something and sells it. But how people get affected out of it on an individual level or at a family level, yes, that risk is always there. But people are comparatively safe when it is regulated by the government.
Would regulation lead to better monitoring and safety checks?
Yes, safety.
Another thing I've noticed is that minute people are caught with drugs, they're viewed from society completely differently. It's like they're treated more of a criminal than as a person, it's like, oh my God, what have they done? They're a drug addict. Stay away from that person. Do not associate with them. So it's almost like their identity becomes tied up with this. So how does this affect their chances at recovery and their mental health?
The most important part of recovery is actually to have the motivation to be able to do it. One of the things that a substance does affect is your motivation to be able to recover. A lot of people don't come for de-addiction because they don't have the confidence that they can actually recover from it.
They give up before even they start.
Exactly. And they're also treated by society as such, like you said, right? There's a lot of stigma around treatment. So what happens then is that even while they're recovering, if they continue to face stresses of unemployment for that matter, or family reminding them again and again, blaming them for mistakes that they have made, that is not to say that a person should not be held accountable. You should be held accountable, but it brings us back to the point of punishment and reform, right? So there has to be a kinder perspective to what society looks at when it comes to people who have addiction as a disease. I feel like there should be a shift in the model where you have to take it away from it being one person's problem. It is the society's problem that there are so many people who are falling into the pattern of addiction and taking the burden of the disease on themselves. And it does not do well to blame it on just one person and their habits or their poor choices. There are a lot of environmental forces at play, which the society itself may perpetuate or ignore, and then later go on to blame the bad effects of it. So it actually does, first, it stops people from coming in to take help. Secondly, while they're recovering, it becomes very hard for themselves to motivate themselves and get better at it, which is why we have rehabilitation centers, we have treatment programs, we have a lot of therapists and psychiatrists who are specialized in the area of addiction. When we look at a patient who has addiction, we don't just see them and their symptoms, we also see the environment that they've been brought up in, whether they had a genetic component to it, because a lot of people who have family members who have an addiction also have an increased risk of developing an addiction. What is the behavior of the people around them? What is the family environment that they're constantly in? What is the work environment that they're in, right? So we look at all of these factors, and every time someone with addiction enters a program to rehabilitate themselves or to go into de-addiction, we also bring in family members or caregivers to explain to them how they need to be kept, they need to be treated for that matter, how they need to be treated, how they need to be motivated. Often we end up treating a lot of family members too, because a lot of family dynamics become worse and are at play when it comes to increasing the stress of an individual who's already having the burden of addiction. So it happens in almost every case that you bring the entire family into treatment.
And we've already established that this extends to the legal system, punishment, treating them as criminals then thing. But in a school environment, it's like the minute a child is caught with this, it's direct expulsion or suspension, which can ruin a child's life. Instead of putting them in a path of recovery, they'll just go worse down the road. What can we do as a society, schools, governments, to better view our society?
I think one thing would be to always encourage a child to come and tell you, even if they've made a mistake or if they've made a poor choice that they feel very scared about. If you do not have open conversations with your children, they are more likely to hide things and make poor choices anyway.
But like the image like the parent will have of the child will forever be ruined, right?
That's not true. I don't think the image the parent has of a child is going to forever be ruined. In fact, children feel this, that they feel so scared that, okay, my parent is not going to love me anymore. And it then becomes the job of society and a job of parents to give the child a nurturing, supportive environment so that they can actually be responsibly taken from a path of, having perhaps fallen into addiction or maybe drug abuse or harmful use towards recovery.
Parents should also draw that line.
Parents should also draw that line. Again, that is not to say that They should not be held responsible or accountable, but you can be held accountable in a healthy manner also.
In a loving manner.
In a loving, nurturing, caring manner too. Schools also need to have that conversation. It's not just up to parents, right? It's also teachers. It's the entire educational system that needs to have this conversation with how they talk to children who come up and tell them that they've made this mistake, or that they saw such and such a thing and were influenced to try it, maybe. I feel like a lot of it can actually be overcome when you give children the right information and the right values and education to make healthy choices for themselves, and give them a space.
Present them both sides of the information.
Yes, absolutely. And give them a space to come up and voice their opinions, so then they can be taught better.
Yes.
That is the responsibility of society.
I need to add something here.
Please. Yeah.
For example, my wife says, okay, when our baby, my son grows up, she said, no, we'll not get him a bike. We'll always encourage him to get a car. I told his friends will have bikes. What are you going to do? I will teach my son how to drive a bike safely and responsibly. Right. So that is the thing as parents, what we need to do. We have the prime responsibility. So my father had told me once, imagine you kill someone. You will come and you will tell me, I might try to save you. I will try to save you. Right. So that confidence I had on my father. And he used to offer drinks to my friends when they used to visit home, because of which I did not end up as a drunkard. So I was trained by my father how to drink like a gentleman and hold my drink. So my friends who were restricted from drinking, they ended up becoming first-class drunkards. So that is how things are. We need to teach. We need to be responsible as parents.
To present like both sides, all the choices that the child may have, and then make the child make the decision themselves.
Yes.
Also to explain restrictions, like there are reasons why restrictions exist in society.
Yeah, not just say like it's because I say so.
Yeah, I think that makes a child more curious and more fearful of asking you. So they will go to other sources where they might not always get the healthiest explanations. I think to explain your restrictions would also do a lot better than just completely banning them from something.
Like, I want to end on these lines. You go to a party, right, and you see everyone around you drinking, vaping, doing drugs, any harder substance, and you're just there. What advice would you give to that one person who, like, they've grown up in a good family and you know that they've heard that drugs, all of this is bad, but they see everyone doing it so in a calm manner, like it's chill. So what would you say to that one kid who's standing there?
It is a very lonely experience to be standing as a person there in an environment where everyone else is using drugs, but you know that you want to make the healthy choice of not doing so. One thing I would like to tell them is it gets better. The results of your choices, of the healthy choices that you make, may not always be seen immediately, but they will be seen later in life when you are happier, you're healthier, and you are more productive, and you're able to achieve your goals, and you're able to live life.
Be healthier, not die at 40.
You're right? So you don't always get the results of your choices immediately. And I know that stings sometimes, and I know it makes a child who feel really lonely when they don't fall into peer pressure. But wait for it. Life will turn out to be less harder for you than it is for people who go through a burden of addiction.
Yes, and if you find yourself in a party, kids, and someone is using stuff, okay, alcohol, go ahead, have a couple of drinks if you're not driving, okay? And if you find something illegal being used, even if it is marijuana, get the hell out of there, because something goes wrong.
So I think that just from a legal perspective. I think from a normal perspective, even alcohol is the worst substance you could be doing for your body.
All right, yes. Yeah, that's true, maximum. Okay, if you know how to drink responsibly and you are of legal drinking age, then if something illegal is being opened, please get out of there. You don't want to, see the insides of a prison. That's the worst place you want to be.
A heartfelt thank you to both of you for joining me here today. Your insights were invaluable to all our listeners.
Thanks for having us here.
Thank you for having us here. Our pleasure. Thank you.
Today's discussion has shown us that drug abuse is not just a legal issue or a personal choice. It's a complex interplay of societal pressures, mental health, and systematic challenges. As teenagers, the choices we make today shape the futures we hope to build. Let's choose awareness over ignorance, support over stigma, and accountability over escapism. Together, we can create a society confronting these issues with empathy, knowledge, and action. Thank you for joining us on Reshaping Society. If you found this episode insightful, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on future episodes. Until next time, let's keep reshaping, one conversation at a time.